The story begins with a bald guy being shown to us. His name is Nozaki Hitoshi. He is 31 years old and single. People say that he is wild because of his name and appearance. It is quite unexpected, but now he is practically naked in an unfamiliar forest in another world. He cooked himself some food over the fire, and as he started eating it, he wondered why everything had turned out this way. It all started out pretty cliched. On his way to work, he helped a student and got hit by a truck instead. As his consciousness faded, he thought, maybe reincarnation does exist after all, and didn't understand why he was even thinking about it. Then the protagonist opened his eyes and was surprised. Opening his eyes, he woke up in a completely white room. Someone called the protagonist and smilingly asked if Nozaki Hitoshi knew who he was. The protagonist responded with a denial and thought that this could not be. Someone asked the guy to come over because he was going to resurrect him in another world. He understood that it was strange, but assured him that the decision had already been made, so he had no right to refuse. He asked if Hitoshi understood this, to which he did not answer at all. A ball appeared in the hands of the unknown man and he said goodbye to him. The protagonist immediately began asking him to stop for at least a second to think about everything. The stranger got a little angry and replied that the guy seemed to be a pain in the ass. The protagonist was surprised that he called him a pain in the ass. The stranger explained that the previous god made a contract with the god of reincarnation to regularly exchange souls. Even after he replaced him, the contract was still in effect, so he was a pain in the ass for him. The protagonist yelled that he said it again. Hitoshi panicked a little because he thought that things were bad for him. Considering what he was saying, Hitoshi should be reborn in another world. He had a bad feeling. The protagonist asked him if he could at least give some explanation before reborning him. God thought and answered in denial. Everything is as he imagines. Levels, abilities, magic, monsters. The protagonist was surprised and asked if he could read thoughts. God immediately added that he would not be reborn as a child. He would reincarnate him in his current body. The protagonist was surprised and answered that this was no longer reincarnation, but some kind of transference or travel. God explained that he would recreate a body identical to his but in another world. Since he would be reborn in a new body, it is reincarnation. He also added that he would not have any cheating ability. The protagonist got scared and asked if he was serious. The god immediately said goodbye, and he didn't even have time to breathe. God thought that he could handle it anyway, and since he was tired of him, he would send him away as soon as possible. Hitoshi asked to wait a little longer, but did not have time to finish and began to fall into the unknown. A moment later, he woke up lying on the grass. He stood up and saw an unknown forest in front of him. He was surprised and thought that this god was crap. Not to mention the cheating ability, he didn't even have any clothes on. Hitoshi understood that he needed to calm down. Right now, he had other priorities. First, look around. The protagonist saw a large tree near him and decided to climb it, carefully climbing straight up. He reached the top of the tree and was simply shocked. He saw in front of him an endless forest around him. Hitoshi noted that wherever he looked, there was forest. He had been sent to such a ridiculous world, it would be quite dangerous to walk here thoughtlessly. He immediately decided that he needed to find a source of water now. When he found a drink, he would need to build a base next to it and get supplies. He decided that he needed to go down and slowly began to do so. The protagonist decided that he needed to tear off some tree bark and make a straw skirt. In a moment, everything was ready and he was happy with it. He thought it was pretty good, although it was a bit uncomfortable and hard to move around in. But he would be able to defend his honor as a human being. For that, he thanked the Discovery Channel. He then clenched his fist and added that since that issue was settled, he decided to focus on survival and move forward. Hitoshi walked through the huge jungle and pushed away all the pieces. It was quite difficult for him to walk, and he did not know how he was supposed to find water. Immediately, something growled loudly, which scared the protagonist and literally froze in fear. A moment later, it was all over, and the protagonist cautiously looked back, wondering if it had gone away. He knew it sounded like a small animal, and immediately realized that the sounds were clues. His eyes weren't that effective in the forest, but he got a lot of information from his ears. You need to constantly pay attention to the sounds around you. The protagonist began to walk forward, listening carefully to every sound. Then he heard the familiar sound of water. This made him very happy, and he quickly ran forward, because he was sure that this sound was water. A moment later, the protagonist ran to a small stream and was delighted. He went into the water and began to drink and wash himself.
I would be very happy if you subscribed to the channel, liked and wrote a comment rating this manga on a scale from 1 to 10. Your opinion is very important to me. This will help me better understand what my audience is interested in, because you are really important to me.
He was happy that he did it. Having recovered from his emotions, the protagonist realized that he now needed to find shelter. Animals gather near water, so it is better not to settle too close to it. He found a hollow in a tree. The protagonist noted that the water was a 2-minute walk away. Like a 300-year-old one-story wooden house. The protagonist thought about it and decided to stay here, and then got to work. The protagonist took a certain fruit and dripped its juice on his skin, and after 5 minutes there was no irritation. He knew that he should then bite off a small piece and wait a couple of hours. If there was no allergic reaction, the fruit was safe to eat. The protagonist was happy that there were many plants that looked edible. He needed to gradually increase the variety of plants he could eat. Now there was only one thing left to do, and that was to make a fire. He took a stick and stuck it into another stick and started rubbing them together quickly. A moment later, a small fire appeared, and the guy put some dry grass in there to spread the fire. In a moment, everything worked out, and the slightly tired protagonist noted that of all the fires he had seen, this was the most beautiful. Afterwards, he lay down next to his fire and simply rested. Hikitoshi yawned and said that he didn't know how many days it would take him to get out of this forest, and he needed food that could last for a long time. He needed to make some smoked meat. If he could, he would also have some skin. Tomorrow he decided to start preparing for the hunt. Then he saw a system window in front of him and was surprised. He stood up and found out. He realized that this was his status and thought it was incredible. He was surprised that there was such a thing. He thought that everything was somehow too simple. There is only one ability. He only has karate. He looked closely at the system window and laughed. He thought it was a good thing, because the ability suited him perfectly. Afterwards, morning came, and he noted that this was more than enough, and therefore it was time for him to get down to business. The protagonist collected some sticks and found the perfect spot. He looked down and understood. He had dug a hole and piled sticks above it, and was going to put herbs in it. Hikitoshi explained that it was a trap for herbivores heading for the water. He had made it from memory, so he didn't know if it would work. Then he heard a sound and tensed up. A strange rabbit came out of the bushes, and the protagonist noted that it was too small for his trap. He immediately saw that the rabbit's ears began to twitch, and realized that he heard someone. The rabbit began to run away quickly, and the protagonist, sitting on a tree, noticed that something was approaching. At that moment, the protagonist's gaze changed dramatically. He saw 3 goblins running somewhere or running away from someone. Hitoshi's mouth dropped open in shock. He realized that these were those classic fantasy monsters, goblins, and that they actually said Gya, Gya. He saw that they were heading straight for his trap. He was excited, because he thought this was his chance to gain some experience. The monsters carefully approached the trap and stopped. The goblins stopped right next to the hole and did nothing. The protagonist watched this carefully. The goblins started sniffing something and looked around carefully. Hitoshi realized that they understood what was going on. The goblins screamed that it was a trap and showed his friends. He pulled out the sticks and they carefully examined the hole, but the protagonist was surprised. He held onto the stick, but from the protagonist's weight, it began to break and he flew down. He grabbed it and noted that since things were going this way, he had no choice but to intervene. In mid-air, he swung his arm and aimed at the goblin's head. The protagonist landed and hit the goblin with all his might, literally killing him with one blow. He was glad about it, but it was only the first. The goblin was simply shocked by this, and the protagonist asked him what he was staring at and rushed forward. He hit the second one, and it flew away. Hitoshi decided to quickly finish off the third goblin. He turned around and saw that the third goblin was not standing idle and was already preparing to hit the guy. The protagonist stood up and asked himself to calm down, because with such a wide swing he was very exposed. The goblin tried to hit the guy, but he dodged, and the goblin hit the ground. The protagonist immediately decided to counterattack and hit the goblin in the face with his fist, causing him to fly off. The goblin lost consciousness and fell to the ground. The protagonist thought it was a great blow, a Saikentsuki right in the nose. He did it. But the goblin was not a weakling and rose to continue the fight. The protagonist was surprised and did not understand whether the vulnerable points of people and goblins were different. At that moment, the goblin screamed loudly. He began swinging his club in front of him. Hitoshi noted that he was attacking him viciously and that he couldn't get close to him when he was swinging like that. Then the protagonist accidentally stuck his foot under a root and started to fall, and the goblin saw it. He immediately ran towards the protagonist to hit him. The protagonist noted that he had intentionally opened himself up to force him to attack from above. The monster tried to hit Hitoshi, but he quickly dodged the blow and jumped out from under the root. He immediately screamed and swung. He struck him with a blow from above on the goblin's neck. A moment later, the goblin fell to the ground and lost consciousness. Hitoshi came up to him and said that it was the end. He just finished the goblin off. After a moment, he trembled a little, and then noted that he had won. He clenched his fists and raised his hands up and shouted that he had defeated these monsters. It was already evening, and the protagonist was sitting near his house. He tore off the goblin's ears and left them to smoke like other meat. His ability level increased. The protagonist was happy about this and looked up and said that he could handle it. He shouted that he could handle this world. Later, we are shown a bearded and hairy protagonist with leather clothes. He was running after some boar and shouting for him to stop and assuring him that he will not let him escape. The protagonist explained that 3 months had passed since he came to this world. He had already reached level 8. The protagonist realized that the boar's center of mass was shifting, turning left. As his level increased, his senses became more acute. He grabbed the boar in one shot and shouted that he was caught. His physical abilities also improved with each new level. He pulled the boar towards him and simply placed it on his shoulder, noting that it was a very large catch. He then looked back and noted that he had found some more chili peppers. They can be used to sterilize and repel insects. They also have a tonic property, so they are very valuable. This plant is identical to chili peppers. The protagonist decided to pick them and said that he would take as many as he could and put them in his belt. Then he heard some noise and decided to look around. He carefully hid behind a tree and saw goblins arguing among themselves. He noted that they were very noisy and that they were arguing. The protagonist yawned and noted that after he got to level 8, his level did not increase, although he had already killed 50 of these guys. He thought about whether he should just ignore them and said that they were lucky today. In fact, he was already worried that he had become the king of this forest in the last 3 months. He immediately turned around because he noticed that they had suddenly become quiet and were looking somewhere. That's what the protagonist thought until this moment, when suddenly a loud roar of some monster thundered throughout the forest. The protagonist was shocked because he did not understand what kind of roar it was. Immediately, a huge black silhouette with a sword appeared from the bushes, and the goblins became frightened. A moment later, a giant goblin with a cleaver emerged from the shadows, and he himself was dressed in clothes similar to human. The protagonist realized that it was an evolved hobgoblin. It was simply huge compared to normal goblins and even people. The hobgoblin approached the little ones, and they began to tell him something. The protagonist realized that he was reprimanding them, and immediately he looked at them sternly. He became angry and gripped his cleaver tightly. A moment later, he cut both of them down at the same time with a simple swing. Since the protagonist came to this world, he saw a monster stronger than himself for the first time. This made Hitoshi a little surprised and scared. At that moment, the hobgoblin turned towards the protagonist, and the guy realized that he had noticed him. At that moment, the monster screamed loudly. He rushed straight at Hitoshi, causing the guy to run away through the bushes, and Hobgoblin simply tore out trees with roots. For the first time, it was not Hitoshi who was hunting, but him. The protagonist was scared and therefore ran forward headlong and even jumped over a huge hole. He turned back and the hobgoblin fell behind a little. It was still chasing him, but the distance between them was growing. Its large body kept bumping into obstacles in the forest. But goblins have a keen sense of smell, so Hitoshi couldn't escape it, considering that it was evolved. In short, he won't stop looking for him. The forest is no longer safe. The protagonist continued to run and realized that he had to get out of here. He couldn't defeat them on his own. He didn't understand what kind of king of the forest he was if he was shaking like that. He ran to his house and, having collected all his things, looked at it and said goodbye to his first home in this world. He thanked it for helping him these 3 months. Afterwards, we are shown him hiding from the rain under a rock. He didn't know how many days had passed since he left his home. He wanted to find some small town where he could at least sleep safely. Now, more than anything, he wants to meet another person. Immediately, a strangely shaped mini tiger appeared, sniffing and looking for its prey. He did not find the protagonist and went on. The protagonist immediately climbed out of the swamp and exhaled. He knew that it was dangerous and that the swamp saved him by removing the smell. After that, the protagonist continued on his way and thought that he would like to talk to at least someone. Then he heard a sound and realized that there was something there. He thought it was another beast or maybe a goblin. The protagonist carefully climbed into the bushes and began to observe. He saw some form of a head and was very surprised. Hitoshi came out of the bushes and looked ahead. A girl with a basket was sitting in front and she heard the protagonist's voice, who greeted her and stood in a strange pose. He was all dirty and in goblin clothes. She was very scared and screamed at him not to come near her and repeated it over and over, and the guy was surprised. She screamed and called him a goblin, which surprised the protagonist greatly, and the girl began to run away. He was very upset because he finally met a person and then this happened. Then he heard a familiar sound and was surprised. He realized that this roar was that of a hobgoblin, and so he ran straight towards it. Hitoshi ran as fast as he could and said he couldn't believe it. He wouldn't leave him alone. He must have decided he would kill him at any cost when they first met. He thought it was probably because he was hanging around his territory and immediately saw him among the trees. There was a girl on his shoulders, and he grabbed her. Hitoshi was glad that the girl was safe, and approaching him he shouted for him to let her go. Running up to him, he told Hobgoblin to get his dirty little hands off that girl, you damn bastard. The protagonist jumped up strongly and prepared to hit him in the face. He kicked him right in the eye and landed on the ground. Hitoshi was surprised that he didn't even fall from such a blow. The protagonist asked the girl if she was okay and could go. The girl said yes. He asked her to leave him to him and just run. The girl assumed that Hitoshi had separated from his group. The protagonist asked her not to worry about him, that he was just a goblin, and that she should run. The girl agreed, and at the same time, the hobgoblin became very angry. The girl started to run away, and the protagonist stood up to cover her. Hitoshi got into a fighting stance and noted that he no longer had a choice and wanted to begin. The goblin looked at the guy sternly, and the protagonist was a little scared. He only experienced this feeling when he wrote a love letter. He wanted to run away with his tail between his legs, but he couldn't while she was here. The monster decided to take action and ran straight forward and quickly swung its arm to attack. The protagonist was able to dodge, and Hitoshi noted that the blow, although strong, was slow. When he opened up, he tried to attack him and immediately hit him in the stomach. The hobgoblin's side was very hard. The protagonist was a little surprised and noted that his body was incredibly hard. The blow was of no use at all. The hobgoblin then attempted to attack him with a sidekick, but Hitoshi dodged and noted that he was now hitting much faster, and the goblin was simply furious. The protagonist dodged again and thought about what to do because the monster's body was too strong. He immediately thought that he would attack the soft spot. He decided to hit him right in the hobgoblin's balls and asked how he liked that. The goblin screamed loudly at this, and the protagonist realized that it worked. He immediately swung his arm and hit him again. He attacked him with his head right on the nose. He immediately ran up to the goblin and hit him on the forehead. In fact, he stuck his finger right into his eye. This made the goblin shrink, and Hitoshi noted that he had succeeded. The monster began to bleed from his eye, and because of this, he began to wave his arms randomly. The protagonist dodged everything, but noted that his strength was incredible. The goblin immediately struck with a direct blow, and Hitoshi blocked it. From this, the protagonist simply flew back, hit a tree hard, and fell to the ground. The protagonist stood up and started shaking. He was very surprised that the goblin was able to easily break through his block, and besides, everything started to swim before Hitoshi's eyes from the blow. The goblin immediately ran at the guy, and the protagonist realized that he was too naive. The goblin continued to deliver a series of blows, and the protagonist dodged. He thought about finding a weak spot. The protagonist examined the goblin and noted that his left eye was crushed, meaning there was a blind spot. The hobgoblin looked closely at the protagonist, and then he disappeared, which surprised the monster greatly. He stood in front of the left eye, and thus literally evaporated for the goblin. He immediately made a high iki from the right, and hit him right in the face. The goblin lost his balance, and the protagonist began to beg for the hobgoblin to just fall. At that moment, the goblin came to his senses and became very angry. He turned around and simply grabbed the protagonist and bit him hard on the shoulder. He literally tore a piece of flesh from him, causing the protagonist to scream loudly. The goblin literally did not let go of the guy and dug his teeth into the body. The protagonist realized that things were bad because he could bite off his hand. He understood that it should not end like this. And straightening his finger, he sent this hobgoblin. He immediately stuck his finger into the goblin's ear, causing him to scream loudly in pain. A moment later, the goblin hit the protagonist and he flew back to the tree. He fell to the ground and thought. He had a lacerated wound, a broken finger, and his consciousness was fading. He looked down and wondered if this was the end. He saw the pepper and wondered what it was. He learned that it was the pepper of this world. The first time he ate it, it was unbearably hot, but at least it was edible. He immediately thought about what he was thinking about some pepper at such and such a time. A moment later, a hobgoblin appeared in front of him and stamped hard. He was very angry and immediately rushed at the protagonist. He quickly ran towards him, and the protagonist realized that this was the end and he was going to die now. He felt a little sad that this was happening again because of a girl. He decided to eat the pepper, and the hobgoblin kept running straight at him. The protagonist immediately woke up and noted that if he was sharp-tongued, then his eyes were even sharper. It was as if a bomb had exploded and he pushed off the ground. He hit the hobgoblin right in the jaw with his knee, which surprised him greatly. They both fell to the ground and the goblin died, and Hitoshi was very surprised and even scared. Hitoshi looked at the goblin, and seeing that blood was flowing from him, he assumed that he had won the fight. Then he looked up and tried to stand up and realized that he couldn't. He couldn't move a muscle, and a moment later his eyes started to roll back. He continued to lose consciousness and then heard the girl calling him. He looked to the side and the girl ran to Hitoshi calling him Mr. Goblin. The protagonist realized that it was her and that everything was fine with her, and his eyes closed by themselves. Afterwards, we are shown a small rural town. The protagonist woke up in a house and didn't understand where he was. He got up and his shoulder hurt really badly. The last thing he remembers is a fight with a hobgoblin. Then he hit a tree. Then he saw that his body was wrapped in bandages, and he wondered if it was the girl who helped him. This meant that she had brought him, and that he was now in a human dwelling. He closed his eyes and thought that, after months of wandering in another world, he had finally reached his destination. He wiped away his tears and added that he never dreamed of sleeping in a bed again. Then he looked around and thought that her whole family used this bed. He saw the pillow and thought about it too. All 5 senses told him about it. Then a girl flew into the room and said that she was glad to see that he had finally woken up. Hitoshi got scared and shouted that he didn't touch anything, and repeated this several times while waving his arms. The girl said that he needed to run away from here immediately. The protagonist was surprised, and the girl pointed to the window and said that the residents had come for him. They would attack him. The protagonist was surprised, and she helped him get to the window. He became curious about why people wished him harm. He saw many guys who came with different tools and weapons to the girl's house. He did not understand what it meant, because she was saving him. They continued to approach the house and scream. The protagonist still did not understand why they wanted to kill him, and asked what he had done. The girl explained that materials from hobgoblins, such as bones and skin, are very rare. They can be exchanged very profitably. The protagonist understood her and asked if they were here to kill him and take the materials. He realized that there were savages among the inhabitants here too. A guy came forward and told everyone else to stand back. He went to the door and started knocking, asking the healer to open the door. The protagonist realized that she was the local doctor, and the girl asked him to be quiet. She came to the door and told them to go home, because she would not let them lay a finger on the patient. The guy replied that they would get along. The guy said that his father is the mayor of this city. He once beat up her old woman, so that's how big shot he is here. But they are completely different, so she has to open the door, and if they don't get along, they will just kill him. Hearing this, the protagonist got scared. She shouted that it had not yet been proven that it was the patient who killed the goblin, and that they were not allowed to even enter through the back door. She immediately gave him some ointment for his hand and told him to apply it to the wounds at least 3 times a day. The protagonist asked her what she would do. The girl was surprised that he was still worried about her. She believed that the patient should be left alone, and the protagonist thought about it. Then he heard someone suggest just killing the 2 of them. This surprised Hitoshi, and he thought that they had gone crazy. The guys explained to each other that if they killed the healer, there would be problems later, especially since she could be useful. The main villain was already looking forward to their sweet days with her. If his father allowed him, he would drug her with drugs and have a lot of fun with her. Hearing this, the protagonist was simply shocked. He got very angry and clenched his fist. He couldn't hear it. Then the villain's friend told him to be careful and not to break it again. Then the girl told him not to even think about fighting, because his hand wasn't completely healed yet. The protagonist realized that she couldn't hear their conversations at all. The girl said that she was a qualified healer, and it was unprofessional to send a patient out into a dangerous forest. She was very sorry. This treatment was all she could give him. She asked him to be careful and thanked him for saving her from the hobgoblin. The girl immediately ran forward, and Hitoshi asked her to wait and almost fell. She left the house and closed the door with herself. He was lying on the floor and thought that he couldn't stay there and needed to get up. This made him scream loudly and get angry. He stood up and quickly walked into the forest. He was losing his strength faster than he thought, and thought he would pass out from the pain here. He immediately saw that the guys had gotten into the house and surrounded him, but they realized that Hitoshi had escaped. Immediately, this villain called the healer, who was being held by the guy, and asked her why the hell she had deceived them and hit her in the face. This made the protagonist very angry. He ordered them all to find Hitoshi because he should be somewhere nearby. He would drag him to where the sun does not shine. He told them to find him alive or dead and smiled very evilly. The protagonist became angry at this and clenched his fist, saying that he would remember this. Later, we are shown a deep forest and that the protagonist climbed onto a huge rock and cooked meatballs for himself over a fire. The protagonist, while eating food, thought that the girl was wrong to send him without strength into a dangerous forest, risking herself in the process. He looked at the sky and thought that he had to go back there, he had to help this girl, and this tormented the protagonist. Afterwards, we are shown that the protagonist has made himself a new home. He thought that the new base was bigger and bigger, and the previous one had many shortcomings. Then he put his hand into a crevice and said what he found. He took out a vegetable and said that the plants in this world were very similar to those on Earth. He found a fruit that looked like jicama. At first, he even thought it was a sweet potato. It would be hard for him to survive by hunting with such wounds, so root vegetables would be just right. He decided to put this food aside for later and crawled back into his house.